Hello, everyone. Well, I'm back, and wait till Helen comes, Chapter 2. On the first day of summer vacation, Dave and a bunch of his friends loaded everything we owned into a U-Haul truck and headed toward our new home in Howell, Maryland. Dave drove the truck with Heather sitting beside him, looking very pleased with herself and Mom. Michael and I followed in our old van. Behind us was another van in even worse shape than ours, filled with Dave's friends. After we turned off the beltway, the roads narrowed and wound up and down hills, curved past farms, tunneled through forest. As we bounced along over ruts and bumps, Mom pointed out the scenic spots. "See that old barn over there?" she explained, pointing to the building on the verge of collapse. "Isn't that a perfect subject for a painting?" When Michael and I mumbled something about Andrew Witt having already painted 100 barns just like it, she'd spot something else in twisted old tree, a line hung with flapping clothes, a flock of geese strutting across the yard, and get excited all over again. "You two are just going to love living here," she said more than once, never losing hope that we'd eventually agree with her. After a couple of hours of driving, Mom turned to us and said, "Here we are." Swinging off the road behind the U-Haul, she pointed at the little white church. "Isn't it beautiful?" It was pretty. No matter how much I preferred our row house, I had to admit that Mom and Dave had picked a lovely place. Quiet and peaceful, the small building sat by the side of the road, shaded by 2 huge maple trees. Although it had no steeple, the tall pointed windows and red double doors left no doubt that it was indeed a church. On one side was an addition built to harmonize with the original building, and on the other was the carriage house Dave planned to use as his pottery workshop. Behind it rose a forest in deep green leaf, and on either side fields of corn basked in the morning sun. Across the road, a herd of cows gazed at us, their big brown eyes taking in everything. "Look, it's the welcome wagon," Michael nudged me and pointed at the cows. "Where are the other houses?" I looked around, hoping I'd missed seeing them. "There's a farmhouse about a mile down the road," Mom said. "But I thought we were moving to Hallowell." I frowned at Mom. "That's our post office address," she said, looking at herself in the rear view mirror and smoothing her hair. I could tell she was a little uncomfortable at having misled me deliberately or accidentally into thinking we would at least have neighbors and the prospect of making new friends. "The town itself is only a couple of miles away," she added apologetically. "You said there was a library," Michael said, leaning across me, his voice full of anger. "I thought you meant it was just a few blocks away or something. You can ride your bikes into Howell." "It's not far." Mom opened the door and prepared to get out. "I told you we were moving to the country." Before we could say anything else, Dave's friends pulled into the driveway behind us and screeched to a stop in a cloud of white dust. At the same time, Dave and Heather got out of the U-Haul and walked toward us. I couldn't help noticing that Dave looked a little tense and Heather was dragging on his hand, trying to keep him from joining Mom. Our first day in Hallowell wasn't beginning very well. "Come on, Jean," Dave said to Mom. "Let's sit this show on the road." "I'll carry my stuff in," Michael said, jumping out of the van. I knew he was worried that somebody would drop his insect collection or misplace his books. "How about you taking care of Heather?" Dave tugged her toward me. Despite her efforts to dig her heels into the dust, as usual, she was frowning through the tangles of her hair, almost hiding her face. "What should I do?" I turned to Mom, hoping she'd suggest I'd help her with something important, but she sided with Dave as usual. "You could take her for a walk," Mom said, patting my shoulder. "There's a nice little path down through the woods." She pointed off to the right of the church. "It leads to the creek. You could wade or something. Don't go too far, though," Dave added, prying his fingers away from Heather's clutch. Knowing I had no choice, I tried to take Heather's other hand, but she snatched it away, scowling at me as if I'd tried to pinch her. "Go with Molly now." Dave succeeded in freeing himself. Daddy has a lot of work to do, honey. You and Molly can have a real nice time. I don't want to go with her, Heather whined, her voice rising in pitch. I want to stay with you, Daddy. I don't like it here. You heard me, Heather. Don't make Daddy cross with you. Come on, Heather. I started walking toward the path, and after some more pleading from Dave, she finally followed me. Silently, we entered the cool shade of the trees. Above our heads, the leaves rustled softly, and the sunlight splattered down through the branches, gleaming here and there at the whim of the wind. A butterfly as big as my hand fluttered across the path, and I was glad that Michael wasn't there. If he'd seen it, he'd have gotten his net and added it to his collection. Look, Heather, I pointed at the butterfly as it rested for a moment on a leaf. Isn't it pretty? She glanced at it. It's nothing but a caterpillar with wings, she muttered. After that, I didn't try talking to her until we found the creek. The water was shallow, maybe 2 or 3 inches deep, and it was racing along over a bed of stones. Between low banks, it was perfect for wading. Sitting down, I took off my running shoes and socks. Want to come with me? I asked her as I stepped out into the clear water. She shook her head and continued following the path along the creek. Shrugging my shoulders, I splashed along beside her, enjoying the feel of the cold water as it rose higher, creeping up to my knees as the creek narrowed and the banks grew steeper. After waiting for about 5 minutes, I came around a curve and was confronted with a rusty barbed wire fence from which hung a no trespassing sign. On the other side, a herd of cow looked up from the water and lowed. For a minute, I thought they were going to charge at me, fence or no fence, and I scrambled up the bank to Heather's side. They're just cows, she said, as if she knew I was thinking that they might be bulls. They won't hurt you. I know, I said, trying to sound a lot more convincing than I felt. Do you want to go back to the church? She gave me one of her disdainful looks. Well, we can't go any farther, can we? She looked pointedly at the fence and the cows watching us from the other side, still carrying my shoes. I followed Heather back down the path. Instead of turning off through the woods, taking the route we had originally chosen, we walked farther along the creek. It was a pleasant path, cool and shady, and I was too busy watching a couple of dragonflies darting back and forth across the water to pay much attention to what Heather was doing. When she stopped suddenly just ahead of me, I bumped right into her. What's the matter? I asked. She looked at me over her shoulder. Look! She pointed at a crooked fence almost hidden by weeds and bushes. What's that? Despite the warmth of the afternoon, I felt goosebumps break up all over me. It's a graveyard, I whispered. I wasn't very big, and the grass had grown almost as tall as the tombstones. But here and there, Stone Angel lifted its marble wings toward the sky, and a cross or two tilted out of the weeds. It was without a doubt the spookiest place I'd ever seen, and I wanted to run back to the church, but Heather stared at it, fascinated. Are you afraid? She asked, her thumb hovering near her mouth. Of course not, I lied, reluctant to expose any weakness to Heather. Edging back down the path towards the church, I said, let's go see what Mom and Dave are doing. They're probably wondering where we are. It would be shorter to cut through the graveyard, Heather said, her pale eyes probing mine. It's probably private property, I said. You could get in trouble for trespassing. But Heather only smiled and slipped through the gap in the fence. Come on, Molly, she said, daring me to follow her. While I watched, she ran through the weeds, paying no attention to the tombstones. It's bad luck to step on a grave, I called after her. Pausing by Stone Cherub, she caressed his cheek and then whirled about, performing a weird little dance as she wove in and out of the tombstones. Molly is afraid, Jan, Molly is afraid. You're crazy, I shouted at her. Then I turned my back on the graveyard and ran through the woods, ducking branches and wretch for my hair and stumbling over roots. By the time I got to the church, I was out of breath and my heart was pounding so hard I thought my ribs would split. Catching sight of Mom disappearing through the side door, I followed her inside and caught up with her in the hall. I grabbed her arm and almost made her drop the box she was carrying. "Molly, what's wrong?" She put the box down and stared at me. "Where is Heather? Has something happened?" I shook my head, still gasping for breath. "There's a graveyard behind the church," I panted. "A graveyard?" "Of course there is. It's part of the property." "It's ours? We own a graveyard?" "No, not exactly." Mom frowned at me. "For heaven's sake, Molly, have you run in here and scared me half to death just because of a graveyard? You never said anything about it. You never told me we were going to have a bunch of dead people buried in our backyard." I started crying then, and Mom put her arm around me. "Dead people in our yard." Michael ran out of the room down the hall. "What's she talking about, Mom?" "You found the graveyard." Dave appeared behind Michael, grinning as if I had done something marvelously clever. "Why didn't you tell us?" I pulled away from Mom, wiping my eyes on my shirt tail. I didn't want Dave to know what a baby I was. "I didn't think it was worth mentioning." Dave winked at Mom. "Just think what quiet neighbors they'll be." No wild parties, no loud music, no dropping in to borrow a cup of sugar or the lawnmower. Why, I bet they won't even speak to us. He gave Mom a hug and a kiss, and they both laughed while I stood there feeling foolish. "Are the graves old?" Michael tried to push between Mom and me in his haste to go see them. "Hey, hold it," Dave said, stopping him. "You're not finished getting your room in order, and Molly hasn't even started. You two get to work. You can see the graveyard later." "That's not fair," Michael said. "Molly's been playing with Heather ever since we got here, and I've been working. Can't I go outside for just a minute?" "Where is Heather?" Dave asked, as if he had just realized she wasn't with me. "The last time I saw her, she was dancing around the graveyard," I said. "For all I know, she's still there." Without looking at him or Mom, I followed Michael down the hall to the room I had to share with Heather. As I shut the door behind me, I heard Heather come into the house. "Molly ran away from me," she whined, her shrill voice carrying right through the closed door. Heaving a great sigh, I prepared myself for the lecture from Dave and set about unpacking my books and arranging them on the shelves next to my bed. It was a nice room, I thought, bigger and airier than my old room in Baltimore. And if I hadn't had to share it with Heather, I would have really enjoyed living in it. From the window between our beds, I could see the mountains, but when I moved closer to see the whole view, I realized that the graveyard was only a short distance away, partially hidden from the house by a tall boxwood hedge. Shivering, I drew back from the window. How was I going to sleep at night, knowing how close it was? All right, I'll see you in Chapter 3.